Hello, and welcome to the Movie Universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Today, I'll be talking about Shining Time Station. This was a great show growing up. I never missed an episode. In fact, I recorded most of them. And even now, this show still holds precious memories to me. It was one of those kind of shows that was on PBS for about 4 years, actually, and it had a pretty good following. These days, sadly, it's mostly been forgotten except by a select few. So, if you're new to this, sit back and listen to what I have to say. You might find it interesting. Now, because it was on PBS, obviously you've already figured out that it was a kids' show. And yeah, it was. It was one of those kind of shows that, well, it was meant to entertain and yet kind of try to get kids to behave one another to people. As we all know, PBS is more noted for its educational shows for kids. But what is often overlooked is there's a lot of shows that just try to teach kids how to be good, how to be respectful to one another. And of course, there's also some life lessons like learning from your mistakes and stuff like that, learning how to keep your promises. That's basically what the show is. It's just literally all that, rolled in with some very interesting characters as well as Thomas the Tank Engine. The show is in a way consisted of two parts. The first part is basically the station itself. You got your characters like Stacy Jones, Harry the engineer, who was replaced in season 2 by Billy Two Feathers, as well as a few kids that were always around, and of course the owner of the little arcade and stuff around there called Schemer. As the name implies, he's, a schemer. He is also the comedy relief character of the show, and he does a superb job of it too, I'll tell you that right now, because his little shenanigans always made me laugh. And unbeknown to Schemer and everyone else, there's actually little puppet characters that are living inside of his jukebox. And they always play a song in every episode. And of course, there was one character above them all, regardless to his size, Mr. Conductor. A little man, probably about 3 inches tall, who appears magically out of nowhere and talks to the kids and Miss Jones and Harry. He never talks to Schemer. In fact, Schemer doesn't even know that he exists. Well, because he's a schemer, so why would he want to talk to him? And tells them stories of Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends. He also gives them some good advice on how to stand up for yourself and how to be a good person, stuff like that. And there were actually 2 Mr. Conductors. For a while, there was the classic Mr. Conductor, who I will talk about in a little bit, and he was later replaced by a second Mr. Conductor who was coincidentally named Mr. Conductor, and he was actually the cousin of the first Mr. Conductor. When he left the show, he took over. And it's quite an interesting story how that came around. In fact, it came up with a Christmas episode. This was just right at the end of season 1. And, well, in a nutshell, what happened was there was this one girl who was down on the Christmas spirit. She was real mopey, and an old man who was at the station waiting for his train came and gave her some great advice and kind of helped her get back her Christmas spirit. And there's a lot of hints, and in the end we realized that old man was Santa Claus. And Mr. Conductor apparently went with him to the North Pole to help him out because he is magic, just like Santa. So with him gone, the new Mr. Conductor had to take his place because there's gotta be a Mr. Conductor there, right? At the same time, when season 2 rolled around, Harry was replaced by Billy. And the kids get replaced too, although the kids from the first season actually do make quite a few appearances in the later episodes, but not like they were originally. Most of the characters are in fact underdeveloped except for maybe Billy Two Feathers, Stacy, Schemer, of course, he's the most developed because, well, he's the comedy relief character, and, well, there you have it. Mr. Conductor would definitely be a very well-developed character because basically he's that good guy who tells stories to the kids. Harry, I thought, was a pretty well-developed character. In fact, I've always been sad that he left the show because he was an old railroader, the kind of guy that has been working the rails for a long time. He knows his stuff, a real good guy to have around, one of those kind of guys that you could just sit down and talk with and, he could give you some great advice, and whenever you need any help, he's got your back. Of course, Billy Two Feathers, he just reeked of wisdom. It was pretty interesting. He was one of the most interesting characters in the show. So when Harry left, he was a perfect replacement. But that's not to say that Harry didn't make one more final appearance. It was in one special where there was a big race going on. I cannot remember the episode, I'm afraid, and they only showed it once. And I have been unable to find it, so sadly I don't remember what it was called. But Harry does make a big appearance in there, and That was a real memorable moment for me. But of course, all those characters aside, we were all waiting for Mr. Conductor to show up and tell his stories of Thomas the Tank Engine. His stories were amazing. I always loved this part. In fact, I think that's what we all really came to see, to be honest, because it was animatronic in a way. The trains were so lifelike because they were actual, well, little animatronic trains. They actually moved on the rails. Their eyes would wobble back and forth. They would move any which way they want. Steam would sometimes come out of their smokestacks. And of course, you had those different facial expressions, as well as Mr. Conductor voicing all of the trains. It was great. You put that all together, and you got one of the best kids shows of all time. And believe it or not, it actually has quite a few well-known stars in here. First off, we have Stacy Jones, who is played by Didi Conn, better known as Frenchie from the movie Grease. She's also been in a few other things too. Schemer is played by Brian Edward O'Connor. He's not exactly a big name, but he has been in a lot of shows, usually small bit parts here and there. Very surprisingly, one of the band members was actually played by Jonathan Freeman, who most of us would know better as Jafar. The second Mr. Conductor was played by George Carlin, who was a comedian. He's gone, I'm afraid, now, but he has done a lot of stand-up comedy and a few shorts here and there. And of course, last but certainly not least, the first Mr. Conductor, who is played by the legendary singer Ringo Starr. That's right, one of the members of the Fab Four himself was actually in this series. And in my opinion, he was the best Mr. Conductor. With that unique voice of his and the way he told the stories, it was amazing. Not to say that George Carlin didn't do a good job, but I've always preferred Ringo Starr to George Carlin. And that's pretty much all I could say about the show. It's one of those types of shows that you have to really see to really understand why I love it so much. Because once again, and I know I've said this quite a bit lately, anything I say will not do it justice. It's really one of those things you have to watch. So if you ever get the time, look it up on YouTube. You can actually find it. It's going to be a little cheesy now because, let's face it, we're grown up now, and this was meant for little kids. And of course, as we know, back then, the idea of little kids shows, they were meant to be really lighthearted, funny, and pretty corny at times. But they worked. So just try to put that aside, give it a chance. I think you're going to like it. This is Movie Fan, signing off.